You're listening to the University of Sioux Falls Campus Ministries podcast.
Hi everyone, my name's Matt Stiles and I serve as the campus pastor at the University of Sioux Falls. On this podcast, we have conversations with USF staff, alumni, students, and experts in the community to help us better integrate the Christian faith into our particular field. Our focus this semester is created for community. Our guest on the podcast today is Brooke Murphy. Brooke serves as an associate professor in the Fredrikson School of Education at the University of Sioux Falls in both the undergraduate and graduate programs focused on teacher preparation. Prior to teaching at the University of Sioux Falls, Brooke worked in education, healthcare, and athletics. In healthcare, Brooke focused on developing programs and curriculum and personal development for a large healthcare ministry. In education, she taught learners from elementary age students to adults, and throughout those stages taught English, Spanish, and how to maintain peace, courage, perspective, and a sense of mission in daily work. She has spent time teaching in both traditional and customized learning environments. So lots of experience. Brooke, we're thankful that you took the time to have a conversation with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So this semester, our theme is created for community. And what we're doing is we're discussing the importance of community and sharing helpful insights about how to best cultivate community. And so you've had experience as an educator teaching elementary age students and adults, but you've also had experience in developing some of that curriculum for large healthcare systems. And so I was wondering, how have you seen the importance of community in both the education setting and in the healthcare setting?
Absolutely. Well, teaching and learning, regardless of where you're at and whatever age you are, really comes down to some foundational pieces, and community being one of them. I believe it was Maya Angelou who said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. And I think a big reason for that is that learning is inherently difficult. Mm-hmm. It should be, or it's not worthwhile,
Sure.
Right? It requires someone to be willing to fail, to admit that they don't know, to maybe look silly at times. And for that to happen, for someone to engage in that process willingly and truly engage, there's an element of vulnerability, risk-taking. And for someone to say, yes, I am willing to be vulnerable enough to take that risk, trust is important. And for that trust to be built, that's the connection. That's the community. That's the relationship piece. And I think that's true in our classrooms, but that's true in just life in general. We're trying to influence people, and we want to be influenced by people and changed in good ways by people. So those relationships, that community is really pivotal. So that's kind of that first piece, is relationships are really a foundation for someone to authentically engage in the difficulty of saying, I don't know, but I'm here willing to learn and try. And then the second thing that comes to mind in learning related to community is feedback. I love the Brene Brown quote, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Mm-hmm. And clear doesn't have to mean mean. But to be able to give feedback to someone, the positives, hey, this part was really great. And then also maybe that corrective piece. Hey, this part wasn't hitting the mark yet. To be able to give that, a relationship is really important, because we want that receiver to say, oh, I see what you're saying, and not, what the heck do you know?
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
So that relationship is really important, to have that open and honest dialogue for feedback, which is critical for again, that learning to happen, whether we are in the classroom, in a healthcare setting, wherever. It's the foundation of everything.
Yeah. When you think about the importance of opening up, being vulnerable, but also trusting someone else enough and how important those are, I think of multiple conversations recently, which is the climate of the world, where I'll hear a repeated comment of like, I don't trust anybody. And just thinking about how that lack of trust can also lead to a lack of learning. Because if I can't trust anybody else, then what I'm going to do is I'm only going to look for the people who 100% agree with me. And I then seek out those echo chambers. And I don't actually enter into community or enter into learning, but then kind of enter into a spirit of divisiveness that works its way out. Have you noticed that there's certain practices that help develop trust in your experience, whether it's the classroom setting or in the healthcare system?
Absolutely. Things that we talk about in our classroom, some of them are really, really simple. Use people's names. We like to hear our names. It matters that someone knows us by name. We hear about that in scripture too, right? You are known. And if Kennedy and Kylie are listening to this, they're going to laugh because I called them the wrong names for an entire semester. I apologized each time. But using names, something so simple. Dr. Carol Donater was here in 2018-19, and one of the things that she said that stuck with me was, could you name 3 things about each of your students? You could change that to, could you name 3 things about the people on your dorm floor or in this class? Or whatever the scenario, because then you are getting to know them. So I might not talk to my students about that, but that's a practice that I have. And I write those things down because I'm forgetful. So then I can go back and reference those, but there's an intentionality there. Other things that we talk about to build that trust is creating authentic spaces to discuss. Sometimes that's about content, but then sometimes that's about real life moments, experiences, thoughts, and certainly how to share those respectfully, with civility. We've lost a little bit of that. So we do talk about, especially as we are working with future educators, what does that look like and how do we teach students that? Because we have learned how to have discourse without civility. We can learn again how to do it with. So what does that look like? How do we create sentence stems for how do you disagree with someone? I hear what you're saying, but I also think that, right? Or so some things like that. Lisa Riddle will talk about our assumptions in her classes, not basing a person's entire existence off of one story that you know about them. And I think that leads into a curiosity about people that are around you, entering into spaces, believing that someone has something to teach you, someone has something that will brighten your day. So expecting that to happen in a space full of people, I think that is a mindset that's important. One thing that we talk about in our classrooms as well is being honest about learning being difficult and just calling out the vulnerability that exists in a learning community. Which again translates to a faith community, which translates to a work community, a neighborhood community. That's transferable.
Yeah, I think all of that is helpful when we think about being curious people. And a lot of times where we hear one story, we assume because maybe that story has been connected in different ways in somebody else's life that we maybe just take all these dots and say, all right, this dot must be connected to this dot and this dot is connected to this dot, rather than actually listening to people. And even thinking of an image of the Bible where Jesus does this is the woman at the well. And in that culture, it was seen as taboo for a male to talk to a female, especially a male Jewish man to a Samaritan woman. And as they're passing, he stops by and talks with her. And she's out during the heat of the day, which is not a time to go and draw water. It's a time when you try to avoid other people. And the reason she does is because she has this past. And so there she is drawing water, and Jesus actually moves towards her and starts a conversation with her. But she is just shocked that, like, what is this guy doing, actually talking to me? And the fact that Jesus demonstrates that also, I think of the Apostle Paul, too, where he writes to the Thessalonians and says, you know, it was a gift not only to share the gospel with you, but I shared my very life with you as well. And so there's this exchange of not just information, but also an openness to know them as people and to be known as a person. And even thinking of church, a lot of times when we think of getting to know people, we think of seeing them up on a stage or just getting information. And there is something else that happens when you get close enough to know somebody's story and to ask good questions, and to also let people ask questions about you. And that exchange of not just sharing a space, but sharing a life, I think can be helpful for how we think about forming community.
Yes. And another thing, I love Brene Brown, another thing that she says in relation to that is, and I forget which book it is in, but people are hard to hate up close. Mm-hmm. And what you're talking about is getting close, right? Asking and answering questions, believing that someone's sharing a piece of their heart, a piece of their life with you. And that goes into something we were talking earlier about listening as well. If you are going to have a conversation, that requires speaking and listening and thinking. Part of that listening process. And there was an article from The Atlantic. This came up in a class that I took not that long ago, and I don't have the actual article, so I can't provide that. But they speak of the article in The Atlantic, which states that in a conversation between two people, that the average pause between when one person stops talking and the next person begins talking is 200 milliseconds, about the time it takes to utter a syllable, which only becomes important when we know the follow-up information that it takes 600 milliseconds, so 400 more milliseconds than the pause, to retrieve the word from memory. So when we are having a conversation, the person that you're talking with, or in my case, myself, because I'm very guilty of that, I am formulating a response to what the person is saying before they've even finished, instead of just listening and thinking.
That eagerness to hop in, to either respond, or sometimes like a discomfort with silence too. We don't know how to let things be silent. And I think of one story particularly of a friend of mine, and he was serving at a church. He was doing youth ministry. He'd meet with the lead pastor. The lead pastor was very comfortable with silence, and my friend was not so much. And they would get together, and there would just be long pauses of silence. And my friend would hop in and just try to fill that quickly. But at one point, he was in this moment of awkward silence, and he started filling it. And the pastor said, "You need to learn to be comfortable with silence." And I think a lot of us, we just don't know how to do that. And we want to fill every space with noise. Do you find yourself, even when people teach, I would assume, just even in pastoral roles, I know a lot of times the temptation is you ask a question, you wait for a little bit, and I don't know, 10 seconds feels like 5 minutes. And so you just automatically try filling that. Do you talk to different educators about, hey, don't disrupt that time?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We call that wait time. Carla Didi was talking about that in one of her sessions this morning, just the importance of it, and how if we are uncomfortable with that wait time, we'll ask a question, and then we'll ask a follow-up question and a follow-up question. And people's brains need a little bit more time to process. And then what question are you actually answering? Because now there are 3 on the table, you know?
Yes.
And so that wait time is critical. And sometimes it's the discomfort that draws out the responses. People otherwise wouldn't have shared if you just moved on. And is that also sometimes true in our conversations with others? If we're not willing to sit in that discomfort just for a moment, are we missing a really good insight?
That is interesting that the intention to try to stir up conversation can actually lead to shutting down the conversation, where it creates an expectation of like, okay, it's been awkward, they're going to fill that gap. So everybody waits for that. And once you go past that, it's like, they're not going to fill it. Like, we have to do something. Thinking through different ways that we try to cultivate community and then actually work against it. Like, I know another hot topic right now is technology and screens, where technology can be used in such a way to connect with a wide range of people or connect from a distance, but that also it has its downside and people are noticing that. What's been your experience with technology and how it relates to community?
Well, something that you just said was noise. And that immediately made me think of technology and the phones that we all have at our disposal. And I think while there are many benefits to the technology that we have, there are a significant amount of drawbacks as well. One being, for example, when students come into the classroom, it's uncomfortable to not know anyone in that room. And so we fill that discomfort with the phone in front of our face because I can scroll or I can check an email or text or whatever instead of being vulnerable and maybe introducing myself to someone I don't know or that I don't know well. I find myself guilty of this even in line at the grocery store, whereas 10 years ago, I probably would have struck up a conversation with someone. Now I have to be very disciplined to not pull out my phone and check an email. So I think just the time away on our devices is itself a barrier to community because it's time that we're taking away from community.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And then there's just a concerning amount of research about the detrimental impact of social media, which is humorous, not humorous, that it was touted as this way to keep in touch and build community. And that it may in some ways do some of that, but most of the time it's superficial. It's creating this culture of comparison. It is taking away hours of scrolling. I had read last year that the average college student spends 8 to 10 hours on their phone in a day. It's a lot of time taken away from something that could be life-giving, community, being devoted to something that has been proven to have negative impacts on our mental health, physical health,
Right.
And it was designed to be so by psychologists and tech engineers to be addicting. And it is.
Yes.
Anyone that has a phone, no, I mean,
Yes.
the amount of time that I spend reminding myself, no, I don't need to pick that up. No, I don't need to know what that notification says is embarrassing.
Yes.
But so I think all of those elements, the constant notifications, the myriad of ways people can get in touch with us, whatever apps, email, texts, all of that is time and distraction. And then also it is a way to connect, but it's oftentimes a subpar way to connect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can be guilty of this too. Instead of walking across campus, I'm sending an email. Or sometimes it would be far more efficient to pick up the phone or, walk 100 steps to go talk to someone.
Sure.
Less gets lost in the text, right? We can hear tone. But so often we spend time crafting text messages versus me walking down to their door.
Yeah, it is interesting in the pursuit of efficiency. Not only is there sometimes a lack of efficiency that happens just because of all the energy put into sending a subpar form of communication, but also the idea of connecting with more people. Also, as you connect with more people, you connect on a thinner level. The relationships are not quite as in-depth, and it allows you to connect with people further away, which ironically then doesn't allow you to connect with the people closest to you. And thinking about that idea of accessibility and being able to step away from the screen or from the phone, because like we can get emails wherever we are now, and not only can we get emails, then the expectation is that we'd respond to those emails. And I like trying to create a practice of, if I get an email or call at this time, I'm not going to respond, of just trying to ignore that, which doesn't always happen. But I think in reality, what that'll do is probably lead to disappointment from others. And I think there's a social expectation there too, where it's like, I don't want to disappoint other people, but I think for the sake of not only self, but also for community, that like, hey, I need to disappoint people in this area, because we can't always be accessible, because then we can't really be anywhere.
And we talk about that in education courses too, that what is your expectation for when you will respond to messages? Because the first time you start responding to messages at 8 p.m., like you mentioned, the expectation then becomes, right, that every time I send an email to this teacher, I'm going to get one back. But I think the reverse is also true. People will learn by the boundaries that we set. Oh, I know he'll get back to me tomorrow when he returns. And I agree with what you said, that can be disappointing, but I also think that can be life-giving, because that gives other people permission to do the same. And we have gotten so used to being able to get information and responses immediately that has become the expectation. When for hundreds of years, a postman had to deliver that piece of mail.
Right.
People didn't know exactly what you were having for dinner that night. I mean, we don't have to have the immediacy that we have come to expect, which is, I suppose, like slightly different topic than tangentially related to community.
No, I think that's a helpful thing, of even as we relate to others in the systems of technology, to think like, when it feels like I'm disappointing other people, I also might be creating the kind of space and example that encourages others that they can do the same. And so that, I think, builds a healthy community with boundaries as well. I was also thinking of just the level of noise and the inability to focus on others, but even probably the inability to think through our thoughts more deeply. Because previously, before I had a phone, I sit in a waiting room, and if I don't talk to other people, I'm thinking through things. I'm having to sort through ideas in my head. And if I don't have that space, then as I enter into other relationships, entering into conversations, I think can be a real help. There's a song also, it's called Car Radio, which the lyrics go, someone just stole my car radio and now I just sit in silence. And basically it's talking about the fear of losing that sound, because if I have to actually face what's going on, and I have to somehow think through this and form my own thoughts rather than just looking at everybody else's thoughts or voices coming in. And I think some of that can just really help us then enter into those conversations with others with a kind of preparedness that we might not otherwise have.
And related to that, I'm really buoyed by some of the more recent trends that I'm seeing that indicate the younger generations are picking up on this.
Yes, yeah.
And that pendulum is swinging, which is good for each individual in and of itself, and good for the community, the world as a whole. One last thing that I think is important to consider as we think about creating community, building relationships, is assuming positive intent. So when people say something to us, instead of automatically assuming what they meant, and perhaps with a negative lens through which we're viewing what they've said, we assume the best. What's the best thing they could have meant by that statement? And that a lot of times allows me, at least, to remain curious, to ask further questions versus proceeding with judgment and like I know exactly what they meant. And I think doing that requires some courage and a little humility.
Yeah, I think that's an encouraging word to end on, that there are some movements going in a different way that allows the kind of silence that's needed and encourages the kind of boundaries that are necessary for us to actually lean into relationship with others. So appreciate your willingness to share your insights and thoughts. And so thank you for being a part of the podcast.
Thanks for having me.